There's good news, there's bad news, there's good news, and there's bad news, and there's bad news. There's news, okay, that could be good or bad depending on how you take it, but either way, it's a little bit confusing. So we're getting a little bit technical in today's video, and mainly has to do with the iPad Pro's future display technologies, which, given everything else about the iPad Pro is so great, this is probably the one thing they can actually focus on moving forward. Let's begin. So in case you guys weren't aware, I love my iPad Pro. No, it is not the 2020 version, but the amazing thing about it is now over 2 years old, coming up on 3, and it is still so incredible. Like, the specifications are still relevant and comparable to today's tablets, and still better than most Android tablets out today. And I use it as much as I can. I love the biometrics, I love the design, I love the ProMotion 120 Hz refresh rate. Everything about it is awesome, plus USB-C, Apple, you know how much we like this, to the point that I have a hard time figuring out why I should ever upgrade this thing. What would justify me getting an upgrade? And for the longest time, lots of people have been waiting to upgrade their iPad Pros to get the mini LED version that's been rumored for a long time. I was one of the few people in the world saying that the mini LED iPad Pro wouldn't ship until 2021. So many people didn't believe me because so many were claiming that no, it's gonna come out later in 2020 and don't buy the 2020 iPad Pro because you gotta wait for the good one coming out later with mini LED. That's the one to wait for. That'll have the A14X chip, and that'll do so much more than the stupid March refresh that just has the LiDAR and the ultrawide sensor. Well, I may agree with you that it was kind of a stupid refresh and there wasn't really a lot to talk about, but that whole game you guys keep trying to play of, well, wait till next year. Well, wait till next year. It'll get better next year. Today's leaks are not going to help that argument because it goes back to a claim that I've made for a long time, which is that you have to always acknowledge the fact that in a year, technology is most likely going to be better than it was today. That's just typically how these things go. And if you're deciding on, well, I should wait for this big refresh or I should wait for this big refresh, guess what? There might be another big refresh in 2022 as well, according to Barclays. I have a habit of mispronouncing things on my videos, so I'm just going to start intentionally mispronouncing names. So this report comes from Barclays, who actually has a lot of proven track records in the past. They were the first to report on Apple removing the charge brick. They were the first to report on Apple removing the headphone jack adapter with later iPhones, and they were the first to talk about the removal of 3D Touch with the iPhone 11. So they're pretty reputable, and they're saying that by 2022, which may sound like it's a long ways away by the time you're watching this, but honestly, 2022, at the time of recording this video, is only like 366 days away. So it's really more like a year and a half that they're talking about right now, but the iPad Pro is going to start adopting OLED displays, similar technology that's going into the iPhones, except of course with 120 Hz, and that would likely make them a bit more on par with the excellent displays in the Tab S7 world. And there's several ways to interpret this. For one, you can be like, hey, cool, the iPad Pro is getting OLED, and of course it'll still have 120 Hz, so it'll have all of the great XDR features that my iPhone does on the larger display. And because it's a Super Retina XDR, it will likely have a higher pixel density and a much higher resolution than the current iPad Pro does. Not that that's a common complaint from iPad Pro owners, but part of the reason I think you can interpret this as somewhat bad news is, what does that say about Apple adopting mini LED next year, right? Because this report is not saying that we're not getting an iPad Pro in 2021. We are, okay? That's probably coming out in the first quarter of this next year. So we're only a couple months away from Apple dropping this iPad Pro that's going to have mini LED, which is not OLED, but provides a lot of OLED benefits like deeper blacks and more saturated colors and a higher contrast ratio. But if they're planning on adopting OLED later, the following year, I guess it means that mini LED, while providing a lot of OLED benefits, is not quite as good as actual OLED. This is just confusing everybody now, isn't it? Because now it means, okay, let's say you've been waiting to upgrade your iPad Pro for a long time. You've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and you didn't want to buy the 2020 version because everyone told you to wait for next year's, wait for the mini LED iPad Pro because that one was going to be leaps and bounds better. Now if you waited all this time and you decide to upgrade in the next few months and you're like, cool, I got the mini LED iPad Pro, this one's fancy, it's got the faster chip, this is the best and greatest the iPad Pro's getting, it's all incremental from here on out, and then a year later they adopt OLED panels and those actually end up being way better than the mini LED panels. Well, now you were waiting all these years to get the major iPad Pro refresh only for your iPad to suddenly have the more dated display a year after it came out, which definitely kind of sucks. So my view viewpoint on it is I don't really see OLED itself as being a huge game changer for the iPad Pro, but I get it. Some people really appreciate having that, you know, pixels being completely off and they want those richer colors, but it's never something I noticed when using my iPad Pro. I've never been like, that blue is just not blue enough for me. But similar to lots of features in the past, sometimes you just have to see it before you realize you want it. And maybe if I see a mini LED iPad Pro, I'll be like, oh, okay, this is game changing and I love it. But until then, I just feel like my current iPad Pro is still great and Apple's gonna have a very, very hard time justifying me to upgrade, unless of course the A14X chip that's coming next year has some type of game-changing performance that allows the iPad Pro to do stuff that it currently can't do. Something that would convince me to upgrade is if they announce that, okay, these new iPad Pros have more RAM and they have, you know, M1 chip levels of performance, and now we can put Final Cut or Logic or, you know, video editing class software onto the iPad, and we can't do it on the older iPads because they're just too weak. If they announce something like that, okay, then I would be interested, and I would just look at mini LED as a nice extra perk. But for viewing content, watching videos, and social media and everything I use my iPad Pro on right now, even though it's not OLED and it's still using good old-fashioned LCD, I still think it looks great, and the pixels not being completely off don't bother me that much. So I'm not in a big hurry to upgrade my iPad Pro, but I'm curious if this news changes any of your guys' opinions. Have some of you been waiting so long anyway that you're just like, I don't care if by 2022 it gets an OLED display. I bet the differences between mini LED and OLED won't actually be that drastic, so you're just gonna upgrade when the mini LED version comes out? Or does this news make you think, well, I would hate to buy one and then a year later have it be worse, so I'm just gonna wait one extra year for the OLED version in 2022, and maybe by then the A15X chip will be even more powerful, and by then they can start bringing some more desktop class features to the iPad, and then you'll upgrade from there. Feel free to let me know what you guys think. This is your Apple Shape here. I'll see you guys in the next one.